Israel pummels Hezbollah with pager attacks, walkie-talkie attacks, and of course the assassination of Hezbollah's longtime leader, Hassan Nasrallah. 35 days from the presidential election, President Trump continues to have a slight lead in the Electoral College. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visits the United States in what is obviously a photo op and campaign boost for the Harris campaign. President Trump meets with Zelensky as well and treats him with slightly less respect. Welcome to Inside Israel News, your home for American conservative commentary on international affairs and thorough and unbiased analysis of Israeli news, politics, and current events in the Middle East. Or as the internet trolls say, mouthpiece of the Zionist conspiracy, spokesman for the elders of Zion, highly paid propagandist of the Mossad. Yeah, no. This is Inside Israel News. I'm your host, Isaac Kite. Welcome back, Insiders. A lot going on in the world now. So much going on with Hezbollah and Lebanon that I'm going to start the Israel segment first, earlier in the podcast than usual, ahead of the American commentary. Keep the American commentary relatively short today, just a few things to say, which I'll do after the Israeli news. And have an Amen's Minute for you today as well. And lots of good stuff there. Then the international news. Japan has a new prime minister. A lot of things going on in the world, so get to all of that. As always, I am yours truly, your gregarious Vulcan, your shadow president, your prophet of things to come, your mad genius, bringing you excellent commentary. This has been another week where, I've listened to a few, as you guys know, I listen to a lot of podcasts and a lot of shows, especially by history scholars. This has just been, so many people saying the things that I have been saying, so many people parroting me without, I probably don't even listen, but the point is when people like the Goodfellows podcast over at the Hoover Institute are saying the same thing that I'm saying, and European politicians are parroting me, when things like that are happening, I feel good. It means obviously I kind of sort of know what I'm talking about. Lets you guys know that you're getting the best commentary, but also and analysis, but also it's good to see other people waking up to the realities that I've been aware of for some time and sharing with you guys. And that means that you guys are way ahead of the curve on a lot of things, of course. First, an update for those who have been asking and appreciate your prayers. The cricket, little Cecily, is doing just fine. She's gaining weight. We're going to fewer and fewer doctor's appointments, and she's been spending time getting all kinds of love from her older brothers. It's very cool having 6 older brothers, I suppose. But we've also, as far as we've been able to tell, aside from Down syndrome, really, Cecily doesn't seem to have any other major health issues. She's very social. She does minor thyroid issues, nothing too serious, good heart. So we're grateful for that and just doing our best to take care of her and meet all of her needs. So again, appreciate the prayers, appreciate the support, getting messages of encouragement, and I appreciate all of you guys. We have 6 older children, and now we have little Cecily, and we're, like I said, I'm just going to raise her like she's one of our children, and if she needs a little more time and patience on certain things, well, we'll do that. So thank you again. I've also been continuing my reading and good intentions. My friend Bob Zeidman's read these great books, taking wokeness to its logical conclusion. Is there any logic in wokeness? But it's fun. He's got this book, Good Intentions. It creates this, fictional future world where wokeness has gone all out, and kids have to wear these safety suits that don't allow them to get any kind of injury, and where trans fats are a controlled substance, right? Where political corruption is a way of life. And, our main character, Winston, has the job of presenting the other view, being a fact checker, basically. Every time somebody goes out and makes a speech in the park or whatever, he's got to run out there and, make a contrary speech. And of course, he'll end up being a nominee. There are people who want him to run for president because he's the perfect, the perfect woke candidate, has all of the pedigrees, right balance of minority and all this kind of thing, from a middle class family. First of all, I was born in a middle class family, and we had a lawn. Okay. Anyway, good stuff. So Good Intentions by Bob Zeidman. Great book. Go check it out. It's a lot of fun. Also Animal Lab, and Bob's written a couple other things. There's also a Good Intentions newsletter. You can go look up the Good Intentions newsletter and get ongoing updates from Bob there. So go check that stuff out. Good read. Like I said, I read so much stuff that's so intense and whatever. It's nice just to take a minute to enjoy a fun story that is amusing, it's a little dystopian, but in a kind of a lighthearted way, and then it's a little bit entertaining. All right, Hezbollah. Man, I'm telling you, what a thing. So, in an operation that had been planned for 15 years, the pager operation, 15 years of planning. This is just an incredible story. I mean, so obviously Israel can track people just like most people can do, and we do this for criminal justice as well. You can track people's location by smartphones and by SIM card, wherever their SIM card is, and triangulate them with different towers. So it's not safe if you're a terror leader to be going around with your phone on, right? So they got pagers for people, so that the upper echelons of command, the top, thousands of people could have these pagers that would allow them to communicate. And then they could go to a phone, some randomly located phone, have a quick conversation, and then leave that location. Well, Israel, Mossad, we have this joke about definitely not Mossad Inc., right? Supplied them these things with, just a little bit of plastic explosive in them, right? Doesn't take much with plastic explosive, a little plastique. And, then, of course, when the time came, they could all be set off. And the same with the walkie-talkies. And it just, it's great. So one day, these pagers, for the top leadership of Hezbollah all exploded. Right? Received a message telling them to detonate it. It's an ultimate Order 66 thing. Right? I don't know that it happened this way, but, you can just imagine Bibi on the phone, execute Order 66. And off go the pagers. Beautiful operation. Whoever came up with that and planned it, very, very nicely done. That plan had its origins, actually, when I was studying in Israel back when Bibi first came back to office. The intelligence agencies, obviously, had nothing to do with the political movement at the time, but the intelligence agencies planned it and got it all going. Anyway, but, they went off. Now, a lot of these guys had this pager in their pockets, their front pockets. And so when they went off, they damaged or eliminated some very sensitive areas of the body. Thus, it's kind of been our joke going around that a lot of these Hezbollah terrorists underwent involuntary gender reassignment surgeries. There's been some really nasty-looking pictures out there of guys with their legs bandaged up and, just barely surviving all of that. So in response to all of those gender reassignment surgeries, Hezbollah will henceforth be known as Lesbullah, and they're going to have to change their name and change their flag to be more rainbowy, and they're joining the LGBT community. So finally, Queers for Palestine will have a friendly force in the Middle East. But seriously, folks, we Jews, we should be compassionate. Not everything's a joke. We're very kind and generous people. So we're taking up some charity for Hezbollah, or now Lesbullah. And we've got a charity going. So if you can, please, reach into your pockets and compassionately contribute to dildos for Hezbollah. Those ladies have to be satisfied one way or another. So we'll help them out. just so they, can continue with life. So, we've spent a lot of this last year in a lot of pain, and from all of the things that have happened. And it's good to have a laugh again. Unfortunately, we've had to, rely on sort of the darker end of Jewish humor these last few months, and now it's nice to have something lighthearted, something to laugh about, something to celebrate. We don't celebrate death and injury to people typically, but when they're people who are trying to kill us, right? This Hezbollah started firing rockets at Israel the day after October 7th. On October 8th, they started firing, and they have not let up since. The rockets and projectiles have continuously fired out of Lebanon, southern Lebanon, into Israel because Hezbollah is, an Iranian proxy, and they're supporting all this, just like the Houthis and the IRGC in Syria and Iraq. All of these proxies have been firing at Israel and attacking Israel whenever they get the opportunity, using, obviously, Iranian-made munitions. So, and just recently we had 12 Druze children. They're out playing football, soccer, we call it here in the U.S., as we do everything backwards. Anyway, they're out playing soccer, and 12 kids are killed by Hezbollah. So, no, I don't have any compassion. These terrorists deserve this. This is one of the best targeted attacks on terrorists ever. And so it's good to have something to laugh about that isn't so serious. Why so serious? Well, on top of that, now, Hassan Nasrallah has been assassinated as well. So the entire Hezbollah leadership beneath him was basically whacked by the pager incident, the walkie-talkie incident. So the pagers blew up, so they grabbed their walkie-talkies, figuring, well, those aren't as easy to track. And, the next best thing to the pagers, well, funny thing, those exploded too. So now they're afraid to go near a communication device. There you are. Now, Bibi went to speak at the UN. He gave a great speech there. He's given another great speech since he returned. But after the UN speech that he gave. Anyway, while he was there, of course, the Hezbollah commanders felt like they were safe, so they went and had a meeting in a bunker in a suburb of Beirut, right? And of course, right next to a UN school, right? And the UN is the United Terrorists. Anyway, so Bibi authorized the IAF, knowing where he was, to blast the bunker. And they also got another Iranian commander there as well. So, bam. Down goes the head of the terrorists. And of course, from the media, we get, charismatic leader, brought moral clarity and purpose to Hezbollah for 30 years, inspired people and this kind of thing, built Hezbollah up to a pseudo-state. Wow, people. Wow. We're going to describe Hitler as, the guy who brought back Germany when Germany was on the brink. And, Germany had a charismatic leader who... It's sickening, people. It is sickening. Hassan Nasrallah was a terrorist. And he was a terrorist boss. His successes, his victories, personal victories, or his leadership successes and all of that are mass murder. They are anti-human, right? Their goal is to kill Israelis, to kill Jews, to kill Arabs, Druze, to kill everyone who stands in the way of their agenda, right? It's a horrible person. So good riddance. So now Israel has done that. Apparently, the assessment is that about 50% of Hezbollah's combat capability has been neutralized. Most of their missiles, rockets, a lot of their weapons supply depots have been destroyed in Lebanon. You can see them going up in their secondary explosions and rockets flying off and this kind of thing. So you can definitely tell that they're weapons depots. A lot of destruction there. And on top of that, their leadership is completely annihilated. And they appointed a new leader right after Nasrallah's death was confirmed, and he didn't make it more than a few hours. So being the leader of Hezbollah is a very short job. You have a very short lifespan in that particular office. So, this is This is how Israel is doing this. So, you know, it's incredible. I just, for years, we worried about what this conflict was going to be like. In 2006, it was extremely difficult conflict. Israel had a long history up till the year 2000 for almost 20 years, having some forces in southern Lebanon to keep peace there and keep order, while Hezbollah, and which is obviously Iranian-backed, and Amal and these other terrorist organizations were attacking Israeli troops and all this kind of thing, trying to act like they were trying to liberate. They just want to kill more people. Anyway, trying to act like that. So, in 2000, Israel left, just unilaterally withdrew from Lebanon, and Hezbollah got a lot stronger. 6 years later, we had the big flare-up in where Hamas had become a proxy of Iran. So they both attacked, firing rockets deep into Israel, targeting Israelis. There wasn't much that could be done about it. A lot of damage was done. And that's why the Iron Dome system was fully funded. Research had already begun on it that provides Israel with greater defense today. And it helps a lot. But it can't shoot everything down. Right, those systems can be swarmed and overwhelmed. So Hezbollah is just, they've built up a supply of a larger number of missiles to fire, and now Israel has destroyed a large number of those, about half of their capabilities. Now, my concern was, as I've heard, you've heard many times in this podcast, if you've been listening, that Lebanon, fighting in Lebanon, the terrain is different; it's more mountainous. And Hezbollah has been helping Bashar al-Assad fight in Syria. So the Hezbollah fighters, they're terrorists, are experienced, right? They're experienced in fighting war. They're experienced in mass murder. They are not just like, Hamas, these thugs, basically, who are, a grade A thug is still a thug, right? Hezbollah is a much better organized force, and so it was extremely dangerous, and I was worried about how that was going to be. But Israel seemed to have the inside track and enough spies and moles to tell them who was going to be where, that they were able to attack and destroy Nasrallah, and of course they were able to get the pagers and the walkie-talkies in. So just incredible. Now, again, I just want to reiterate the surgical nature of these strikes. People are they're leveled apartment building. Hezbollah built their headquarters in a bunker underground beneath, civilian houses. This is what they do, right? Hamas used to have their headquarters under a hospital. And one day, the hospital was vacant, and they weren't using it as a hospital at the time. Years ago, the IDF bombed the Hamas headquarters, and you can see secondary explosions from all the explosives that were stored in the basement, right? And that's when Hamas, they were digging the tunnel. They doubled down on the tunnels, because if they store weapons underground, they're much harder to hit. But we had bunker busters. Obviously, you couldn't drop enough of those to destroy all the tiny tunnels in Gaza. We don't have enough TNT to blow up all the tunnels in Gaza. So it's just a matter of trying to find their access points, blowing those up, caving in key intersections, and that kind of thing. Anyway, so with the essential defeat of Hamas recently and the swivel to the north, which we began to see in April and May, troops, Israel's best battalions and troops being pulled out of Gaza and moved up north and being prepared. I fretted, honestly, that this was going to be a serious ground campaign, that this was going to be terrible fighting and may not really result in anything. But if you recall, I also said, after all of the nonsense, after all the evil of October 7th, the horrors of that day, more Jews killed in a day than any time since the Holocaust, that Israelis deserve to live in peace, right? No more rockets being fired, no more attacks like that. They deserve to have these two particular proxies, and also the Syrians, destroyed, right? And I'm just amazed, and even as a Jew, we're known for being intelligent and clever people. Even as a supporter of Israel, where Israel has been very clever, This is just amazing. The precision of the attacks, the accuracy, the long-term planning. I'm absolutely amazed. I think it's incredibly awesome. This is the best way to do things. Now, obviously, the bombing of Nasrallah had potential for significant collateral damage, but they were able to to get him as well. So, but the pager attacks, just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So you have that. There's an old joke that they tell in Israel, and it really, I've told it on the podcast before, but I'm going to tell it again because it really underscores, it really provides a great example of how Israel does what it does, in terms of maintaining its security. And that is, one day, the Israelis and the Palestinians decide that they're going to end the conflict by having a dog fight. Right, both sides, each side will train one dog. The dogs will fight. Whoever wins, that side wins the war. Right, and it's all over. Okay, so the Palestinians, we're going to have this thing in like 5 years. So the Palestinians take 5 years. They're training the meanest, nastiest dogs. They find the one that snarls the most and growls the deepest, and it's the fiercest dog, kills other dogs without any remorse. It's ruthless, and they've got this dog, and they're ready for the fight. And the Israelis show up for the battle. Here comes battle royale, the dog fight of the century, and the Israelis show up and they enter their dog, and it's a poodle. Palestinians look at each other. Oh, we got this. So they get the dogs together and snarling. They let the ropes go, and here they go at it. And the poodle opens up a huge mouth and just swallows the Palestinian dog whole. And it's like, what the heck happened? There's no more dog. Like, it's gone. And the lead trainer for the Palestinians goes over to the Israeli trainer and says, how did you do that? We spent 5 years training the nastiest dog, the meanest dog, the deepest growl, snarls. We had everything. How did you win? And the Israeli trainer says, well, you spent 5 years training the meanest dog. We spent 5 years making an alligator look like a poodle. And the moral of the story, the joke of the story is, we have this sort of clever way of coming at conflict. And so instead of confronting Hezbollah directly, we got into their supply chain and put explosives on their belts and in their pockets and in front of their eyes so that they would go off and kill large numbers of them, injure beyond function a lot of others. I mean, people's hands blown off, eyes injured, legs injured, all this kind of thing. Now, they're terrorists, right? As Bibi quoted again, and I've mentioned, from Sanhedrin 72a and b, right? When someone rises early to kill you, rise before them to defend yourself, right? It is an important Talmudic principle that's drawn from the Torah directly, that if someone means to do you harm, defend yourself. You have to defend yourself. If we value life, then we must defend ourselves. And so we have. So there you go. Hezbollah, 50% strength, right? Now let's consider the broader strategic implications for just a minute. As I've said before, and other commentators have said things like this, right? We're hearing this from the Goodfellows. We're hearing this from a lot of other commentators out there. When Donald Trump sent Jared Kushner and David Friedman to meet with the Arab governments and feel them out, see what their positions were on Israel, Bahrain and the UAE were willing to normalize with Israel. And so they created what we call the Abraham Accords. And it was a purportedly fear that the Saudis were going to normalize with Israel that led to October 7th. The Hamas wanted to make the Palestinian issue, really serious and that kind of thing, and embarrass the Saudis and make it so the Saudis couldn't normalize, right? But the larger strategic question has been, how effective can Israel be against these Iranian proxies, right? The Arabs want to know, how useful is this alliance, right? How effective can they be? And now we have seen Hamas devastated, Hezbollah reeling, their entire top leadership killed, right? Everyone who was worth having a communications device is now out of the picture, right? They're being led by low-level people now who did not have any of those qualifications before. So there you go. I mean, talk about decapitation. Wow. So I'm still in awe. It's still incredible. But it's another example of, the prowess of Israeli intelligence. Just brilliant. So there you are. Hezbollah is much weaker. They're getting blasted. They're being pummeled. They're weakening by the day. There are already reports of Israeli commandos who have entered southern Lebanon and are active on the streets, obviously out of uniform and in civilian garb, doing harm behind the lines and creating massive consternation. There's the possibility of limited ground incursions, and the IDF is ready. I mean, they're ready to cross the border. If they do cross the border into Lebanon, they may go as far as the Litani River. That's the southern portion of Lebanon. If you look at a map, usually you can see the section south of the Litani River. That would at least provide security for Israelis, most of the Israelis who live in northern Israel, so they could go home, right? Because right now they keep having to go to bunkers and, shelter from the missiles. So, they may go into the Litani River, and we'll see how that goes. Hopefully, I was really worried about the ground campaign because that's where the opportunity for casualties will be. But with Hezbollah now being so poorly led, not having the leadership organization to coordinate attacks and that kind of thing, uncoordinated random attacks that are, attacks of opportunistic attacks. I mean, if it's uncoordinated like that, then they can be very easily stamped out. And basically, if I can describe it, so I mentioned, Hamas is this paramilitary organization that's far less professional than Hezbollah, not as veteran and all this kind of thing. And so Israel ferreted them out in the Gaza Strip in various operations, moving the civilian population around and keeping them out of the fighting, but otherwise going in and getting them out. And I mentioned that Hezbollah, as I mentioned several times in the podcast, Hezbollah would be a different kind of war. Well, now, today, as of today, Israel has turned Hezbollah into Hamas. Right, they have reduced Hezbollah's capability to something more akin to what Hamas was when Israeli forces crossed into Gaza, right? And that's a much more bite-sized problem to deal with. So let's look at the grand scheme of things. Israel has decapitated Hezbollah, weakened them. About 50% of their military capabilities now no longer available to them. And second, they have strengthened their alliances with Arab states, possible normalization with the Saudis coming up, but at the very least, greater cooperation. Right now, they can see the value of Israel as an ally, and the potential now. There is hope. There is the potential that after the horrific events of October 7th, one of the ways in which they are being avenged, and it's not just October 7th. I mean, Hezbollah, these guys that are being whacked, killed U.S. Marines and French troops. I mean, they are responsible for mass murder of Westerners as well, and the mass murder of Christians and slaughter of Christians in Lebanon. Lebanon used to be a majority Christian country. Now it's about a third Christian. And so, there is now the opportunity to finish off Hezbollah as a serious threat and thus establish that security that I was talking about, where Israelis can live in peace. And there have been, the Arab world has taken this also to heart. I mean, there were celebrations in Lebanon in the Sunni neighborhoods. Obviously, Hezbollah represents the Shiite Iranian. Iran is Shiite. The Iranian-backed group in southern Lebanon. Sunnis and Christians were celebrating in Lebanon. There were celebrations in Syria, in Arab neighborhoods that are opposed to Hezbollah. There were celebrations throughout the Middle East. A lot of people happy about what Israel has done. And if the Arabs are happy about it, that tells you something. I mean, the times there are changing, right? And when Bibi said in his speech, there is no place beyond our reach, right? What did he mean, right? Did he mean that Israeli planes could take off from Israel, overfly Jordan, overfly Saudi Arabia, refuel in the UAE or Bahrain, fly out to any place in Iran, drop bunker buster bombs to destroy, to decapitate, destroy military capabilities, or attack leadership, command and control, and that sort of thing, right? And then refuel in Bahrain or UAE and fly back to Israel? Quite possibly. That's a very real threat that the Iranians now have to contend with. So now you see why the Iranians have been trying to get nuclear weapons, because they want to be able to deter that kind of an attack, and it's not much of a threat at this point. So how's this being received in Israel? Bibi's poll numbers are going up and his star is rising. Not a lot. I think some of the more virulent and angry opposition to Bibi has started to fade. People are starting to see how effective Netanyahu's government is. Bibi's doing what he does best, provide security. Obviously, October 7th was a huge failure, and there were a lot of mistakes made there. Complacence, and not just Bibi, all up and down the chain of command. There were, the night before on October 6th, thousands of Palestinians switched their SIM cards from the Gaza SIM cards to Israeli SIM cards so their phones would work in Israel. That should have been noticed, right? Why would they do that? That portends some kind of thing, right? So there was a laxity that isn't there now. But Bibi seems to have recovered from that. And that was the point I've been making about Israeli politics for months now, which you guys know because you're insiders and you know everything. You guys know what's going on. That, when it comes to Israeli politics in the next election, it's the efficacy of the war. It is the conduct of the war that is going to determine how things go. So all these people, if there were polls, the Bibi would be removed, he would fail, whatever. Peter Zion has said it. Lots of people have parroted that, and I've tried to explain, no, that's not the case. Not until the war is over, right? If this war had been disastrous, then, Bibi would have to go, right? With the successes that have happened now, Bibi's star is definitely rising. And that's, with the murder of the 6 hostages just before I issued the last episode, there was a lot of anger. A lot of people were upset on the left, especially, were very passionately angry with Bibi for not negotiating with Hamas. And I understand their anger. And, when we're hurt like that, we want to lash out at someone. And the bad guys are always the bad guys, right? Hamas is always Hamas. They've always been Hamas. We have known who they are, for decades, right? And, you can't really lash out at them. So a lot of people personally, so a lot of people got angry and lashed out at Bibi for that, saying that he should have negotiated. Well, Hamas had no intention of freeing the hostages. They still have no intention. It's their one bargaining chip. They might free them in exchange for Israel's surrender and returning Gaza to Hamas's control, right? But they're not going to give them up. I mean, that's not who these people are. In any case, that anger toward Bibi has softened considerably. There are a number of people I know who did not vote for Bibi, do not support Bibi, were very vociferous about his removal just a few days ago, who have taken a different mood. There are some who are saying, I didn't vote for Bibi, but now I think he's doing a good job. And then there were others who were, I wanted Bibi removed. I hated him. I despised him. He's the worst and this guy. And now they're kind of like, this has come off well. He's done a good job, And so that's softening a little bit. I mean, that doesn't mean that these people are pro-Bibi or likely to vote for him, but they've softened a bit. So Bibi's star is rising once again. And as I mentioned, Likud has been slowly rising in the polls. We don't get a lot of polls in Israel outside of elections, and not a lot of good ones anyway. And again, with a proportional system, it's actually easier to poll because all you're trying to do is get a general idea, the mood of the country. Like, is Likud polling around 20, out of 120 seats in the Knesset? You win parties. People vote for parties, and parties get their proportion of seats based on those votes. So, it's like, look, if you poll and a quarter of the voters say they're voting for a political party. That political party is around 30 seats. Now, when the actual election comes out, if their turnout's a little lower or other parties have better turnout, they might get 27 seats instead of 30. They might get 32 seats if the proportionality works out for them. I mean, but you've got a ballpark, right? It's not quite like here where it's either or, right? Either Trump is ahead or Harris is ahead, right? And so it's more difficult with that because those polls, they have to give a binary answer, yes or no, and they get it wrong. Now, Israeli polls get it wrong too. Like I've said, they kind of have to guess at the Arab vote because it's very difficult to poll Israeli Arabs. And a lot of them, the Bedouins and a lot of their Israeli Arabs vote Likud, for one thing. They vote for the Israeli right, for Bibi, and those who vote left and for their own Arab parties can be difficult to measure, and how many will turn out and this kind of thing. Also, you have the Orthodox parties, the religious Jews in Israel are going to vote for them. We call them the Haredi. The people call them ultra-Orthodox. They're Orthodox. It's not ultra-Orthodox. It's kind of a silly term. Like the word Orthodox means, right, people who very fervently adhere to to their religion without variation or without much variation, with little variation, unreformed, let's just say, not non-progressive, right, very, very, traditionalist. Anyway, so you have those, and then you have the religious Zionists, including Otzma Yehudit, Itamar Ben-Gvir's party, and they're the ones that have been very controversial. Anyway, the point is, things are looking better and better for Bibi going forward, and as I said, when Benny Gantz left the coalition, the sort of emergency government they had put together, the unity government, it was because Bibi's star was starting to rise. So anyway, long-winded way of saying, I told you so, right? If you listen to Inside Israel News, you knew all of this stuff all along. You already knew this back in the spring. 6 months ago, Isaac told you what the inside scoop was on Israeli politics and that things were wheeling around against Lebanon and that kind of thing. So you knew, right? Because you're insiders. You're on the, you get the inside scoop. You're never surprised. Well, I mean, there are surprising events that happen. I didn't predict the timing of October 7th, but I did that summer say what would happen if Palestinian terrorists got their hands on Israeli civilians. It was, more graphic than what I described, but what I described gave you the idea, right? So, anyway, you get the idea. So with that, sort of the last couple of things here on all this, the U.S. government continues to try to undermine Bibi. It's something that bothers me. I know there is a time and a place for the U.S. perhaps to interfere in the elections of another country, right? And, inconvenience is not a matter of, not a cause for us to interfere, right? So like if we didn't like Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, that's not a reason to get involved in British politics and help Keir Starmer come to office, right? The Obama administration didn't like Stephen Harper and the conservative government in Canada, so they wanted something more left, so they pushed and helped get Justin Trudeau elected. Right now, Justin Trudeau's been a horrible prime minister and an imbecile and a pseudo tyrant in Canada, and now he's pulling way behind Poilievre. Poilievre is Pierre, he's way ahead. Looks like conservatives are going to trounce the Liberal Party in the next election. They keep introducing confidence votes, trying to bring up that election, but unfortunately, it's going to be a few years before the election is actually due. Anyway, the point is, just not liking another candidate isn't a good reason to interfere in their elections. But there could be a time where, say, if one of our allies had a really ultra-nationalist party that wanted to start a war with a neighbor running, and you could say, if there are more moderate forces that are not eager, political parties not eager to start a war, maybe we might support them a little bit, give them a little nudge, try to help out. That's not like we just don't like your leader. That's kind of a, hey, we don't want you to start a war that you shouldn't be in. But in this case, Israel is our country's closest ally. Like right now, if America were in trouble, Israel would be there to help us. I have no doubt on that. The Brits, probably. The French, maybe. I'm not entirely sure, right? Germany and Japan, I mean, I don't know, right? I'm not 100% sure, but I know absolutely Israel is on our side. It is 100% in America's best interest to support Israel, and it is definitely not cool to be interfering in politics there. But the Biden-Harris administration continues to pressure Bibi and try to get his government to collapse and support his opponents in the opposition. Oh, and it's infuriating. It's a democratic country. And we're not talking about, some dictator somewhere where if there were a coup and free, such that there could be free elections, right? Meanwhile, where's the pressure on the Arab countries, our Arab allies, to democratize? Where's the pressure on, our more questionable allies on how to, get their get organized? Where's the pressure on Taiwan to organize a better defense, to be better prepared, so we can turn Taiwan into a porcupine and thus deter China? I mean, where's that pressure coming? Right? But we're going to pressure Israel because, he's the democratically elected leader of Israel. Leave him alone, right? So there's that point. Anyhow, things are changing. We're coming up to the 1-year anniversary of October 7th. And as we approach that, let's just take a look around. Gaza has been leveled, right? Gazans are living in refugee camps, tin roof refugee camps for the most part, in safe zones that Israel has set aside so that they don't get bombed, right? And those, Hezbollah, Hamas in this case, Hamas hides among the civilians and tries to use them as shields, right? And stores weapons there and such. But, right, the situation in Gaza is definitely much more secure. Right. And there's people are getting the aid. They're getting food. Israel surged aid. There's lots of it sitting in warehouses there, food and water and clothes and shelter. Plenty for these people to live in, tents and this kind of thing. Right. It's a warm environment. It gets muddy sometimes, but you can live. Right. You don't actually really need a house most of the year. And along the Mediterranean, it just doesn't get cold. It's funny to me living in Israel, the temperature would get down to, like the mid 70s Fahrenheit, right? 23, 24 degrees, and people would be out in parkas and coats and jackets and this kind of thing, and wearing scarves and that sort of thing out, and knit hats and that, and walking around like, God, the mid 70s is a warm day in San Francisco, near where I grew up, right? So, like we're walking around, my wife and I dressed like we normally are, and our son, who didn't like to wear socks, people are lo garbaim, he's not wearing socks. Why isn't he wearing socks? And like, it's warm. Where we're from, this is warm. It's always warm here. Anyway, so it's a warm environment. When it gets into the 60s Fahrenheit, that's a chill. Everyone considers that very cold. Now, up in the mountains, up in Jerusalem and in the mountains that run north and south through Judea and Samaria, right? That it gets cold up there, and it snows occasionally in Jerusalem, but rarely. Mostly, it's kind of a dank cold. It's just a little different from elsewhere. But anyway, it used to be all very forested, and if we could grow all the forests back, it'd be nicer up there. But anyway, a little different up there. So these people are fine. They're fed. They're being taken care of. Right? If they give up their racism and oppose Hamas, maybe something will improve. And meanwhile, Hamas is very they're hiding. They're underground. They're a guerrilla organization. They are no longer what they were. Likewise, Hezbollah, 50% of its military capability destroyed, their entire leadership destroyed. Anyone who was worth having a pager or a communication device is now disabled or dead, right? So a year on, we've avenged quite a bit. But you know what? We'll never get Shani Loke back. We can never have back Aden Yerushalmi. It's a tongue twister. We'll never have Aden back, right? We're still waiting to get back Ariel and Kafir Bibas, two young boys, Kafir a baby, who are being held hostage in Gaza. Naama Levi, still held hostage in Gaza. We want them back, but we'll never get back all of the incredible people who died, whole families murdered. Kind of people shoot children. It's just, that we could have them back would be such a blessing. But you know what? They are all with us. They live on in us, and their spirit with us. If we have the moral courage to stand up to evil, to oppose our enemies, and not to let it happen to others in the future, right? Then we can look each other in the eye once again, wipe the tears away. We've suffered a lot of pain, but we can also move forward with life, because all of them would want us to live our lives, be prosperous, and be successful, and not to let this destroy us. But for too many years, we committed the moral sin, the moral misdeed, missing the mark, right? We missed the mark morally because we allowed this evil to coexist with us. And now we have stepped on it, north and south. And if Iran wants to continue to confront us, we'll step on them too. Now, speaking of Iran, Prime Minister Netanyahu has sent a message to the people of Iran saying, "We stand with you." Interesting message, right? From the sniveling, conniving trolls with horns on our heads, out to conquer the world, secret space lasers, all that, what, right? And Bibi talked about, look, to the people of Iran, what if your government spent all the billions of dollars that it does trying to, bring chaos, terrorism, and horrors to the world? What if it spent that money on healthcare, education, and infrastructure? What if it spent that money making Iran a great place, part of the community of nations, right? A prosperous place for that. And he complimented the Iranian people many times. And he also said that it wouldn't be long before they'd have an opportunity for liberation. Now, that is an interesting thing. There have been a couple of cyber attacks on Iran already. We caused their centrifuges to spin out of control and break and did all kinds of things. But with this recent operation in Lebanon, one just wonders what Mossad and the IDF have up their sleeves when it comes to Iran, because Iran is a threat that Israel has known since 1979, right? They've been working people into the inner workings of their government. They have spies everywhere. The Iranians themselves are concerned about Israeli infiltration and all this kind of thing. What surprises might we have in store for them that are, beeper-like, pager-like, right? Or like walkie-talkies, or the bunker buster bombs. So, sleep tight, Khomeini. The leadership of Iran is sweating. They're definitely worried, right? Okay, so that's Iran. Now the ground operation is beginning in Lebanon, and Israel will hopefully go and get rid of the threat from Hezbollah once and for all. They can move into that area south of the Litani River and get rid of it. This will require ground forces to go in to clear out the last weapons caches, to engage those terrorists who fight back, and just weaken Hezbollah further. Like at this point, they're at about 50% of their military capability. Israel can get them down below 10% with the ground operation, if not more. And then there's this issue. So we've talked a lot about the day after in Gaza, who rebuilds Gaza and that kind of thing. And I've been all over that on this podcast. The difficulty with Gaza is that, as I've said, as frustrating as it is, Israel's going to have to do the day after. No one else wants to. Like the UAE said that they would only participate in, quote, the day after in a program like that if there were a Palestinian state. And that's not going to happen for some time. I mean, it's going to be at least a generation, possibly two, even if the Palestinians really embraced freedom, really gave up their racism, and really decided that they wanted something different. Yeah, I mean, the kindergartners have been playing terrorist, right? So, I mean, we're going to need 25 years, 30 years before those people grow up and a new generation comes in behind them. Lebanon's a little different. So Lebanon used to be a majority Christian country. Now Christians are about 37% of Lebanon's population. The Sunnis make up another larger portion. Together, they're a majority. And the Shiites in the south, where Hezbollah is, are a minority, right? Powerful minority, but a minority nonetheless. Lebanon's been a failed state since 2006. After Hezbollah launched their attacks, Israel damaged a lot of Lebanon's infrastructure in order to impair Hezbollah, and Lebanon economically has not recovered. It has been a failed state. Well, the Lebanese army, which is, backed by the Saudis, the Jordanians, the Egyptians, the Arab states et al., now increasingly friendly to Israel, has said that they would be willing to take care of the day after. Once Hezbollah is destroyed, the Lebanese army is willing to move south of the Litani River in force and enforce the UN Security Council Resolution 1701, passed after the 2006 war, which calls for the disarmament of Hezbollah and a security zone south of the Litani River, which the Lebanese army could enforce. Right? European forces were supposed to do that, didn't quite work out that way, but the United Nations is useless anyway. The point is, Lebanon can take care for itself, right? They can look after themselves with the help of their Arab allies and create a secure country for their future. So, surprises for the Iranians, potentially, and the destruction of Hezbollah on the way. Hamas already having been essentially and effectively dismantled. So as we head into 1 year since October 7th, as we mark the anniversary of that horror, things are moving along. So with that, I will go to the Lippmann's Logic segment and then jump in with the American news a little bit and international news. Some interesting stuff there. A quick Lippmann's Logic today. I'm going to talk a little bit about my last conversation, my last Lippmann Logic. So last time I laid into Tucker Carlson, Pucker Snarlson, because he brought on this goofball lunatic Daryl Cooper to be on his show and to spread 80-year-old Nazi propaganda that really should be in the waste bin of history, except for those who want to study Nazi propaganda. Anyway, so in this Lippmann's Logic, I'm going to continue on that theme. Walter Lippmann, of course, is the journalist and writer in the early and mid-20th century who defended liberal democracy in a time when liberal democracy was most under threat from fascism, communism, all the isms, right? So I think he has some wisdom to offer us today as we continue this battle of isms, right? Anyway. So laying into this, I had a conversation with a guy recently, and Monty, you know who you are, so shout out to you. Where he brought up the question of why can't we just talk about issues like the Holocaust, right? So Daryl Cooper says basically the Holocaust was an accident. Now, some could argue that's a mischaracterization. His argument was minimizing the Holocaust and making Churchill out to be a villain and giving him responsibility for it, which is nonsense. Anyway, so the question comes up because every now and then we get people that, well, why can't we have a conversation with Mearsheimer about Israel? Why can't we talk with people like, now Daryl Cooper, but there's always somebody like that out there. There's somebody, why can't we talk with these people about, why can't we just have free speech? Why does it have to be a sacred cow? So, why do we have the sacred cow? Oi. So the Holocaust was the greatest crime ever committed in human history. And it was committed very specifically against the Jews. Right, and there were other minorities caught up in it: the Roma, homosexuals, the communists, political dissidents. But it was very, very specifically an anti-Semitic crime. Right, it was deliberately targeting the Jews, and the only this ethnic group, us as a people, and that makes us the victims of the greatest crime in human history. When the Jewish population has just recently recovered to pre-World War II levels. That took 80 years, right? That wasn't easy. So it's become this thing. And that victimhood, real victimhood, not, woke, I'm a victim because, we have the greatest women's rights in the world, but, women are victims. Not that kind of victimhood. We're talking about real victimhood. Why do these people want to have a conversation about that? Why not? Oh, well, it's free speech. Well, the point of free speech is that you're supposed to know when people are nutters. And this guy Cooper is a real nutter. And having, a guy like Tucker Carlson, having him on his show is despicable. But not a surprise for Tucker Carlson. He spreads foreign propaganda. He favors our enemies. He spreads foreign narratives. And he's spread anti-Semitic narratives before. So his modus operandi is to be contrarian and borderline racist and anti-American. And as I've said before, it's really dangerous to me, this idea that, you have green-haired college students running around, America's the problem in the world, and people like, Pucker Snarlson out there, America's the problem in the world. When we get that kind of thing from both sides, we don't need that. Anyway, so let's ask the question, why do people want to have these conversations? Back to the Mearsheimer thing, which comes up every now and then. People are, how come the pro-Israel community treats him like that? Mearsheimer doesn't want to have a conversation about America's relationship with Israel. He wants to delegitimize Israel's right to exist. Right? He wants to argue that Israel has no right to exist. The Jews have no right to have a nation in our land, historical land, where we can be free and safe and secure, right? And it's just a step to go beyond that, to say Jews should always be some weak minority to be stepped on, right? That's always right behind all of that, right? That we get to be the victims of ultimate discrimination. Well, guys like Daryl Cooper and the Holocaust minimizers, right? They want to deny the Holocaust. They want to minimize it. First of all, because minimizing it by turning the narrative around, oh, Churchill was the villain. Oh, Hitler wasn't so bad. Oh, it was, it was an accident. It wasn't intentional. They just couldn't feed people. They had to kill people in the camps and this kind of thing. How about, not put the people in the camps in the first place? Anyway, by creating those kinds of narratives and minimizing it, they take away that crime. They take away that victimhood. And then they can normalize anti-Semitism again. And then we bring back racism. And the Holocaust isn't just a crime against the Jews. It is the keystone in an archway of anti-discrimination. I don't know even what to call it. I mean, just the bulwark that we have built against anti-discrimination, the wall, the line that separates us from bigotry. It's this archway. And the keystone of that archway is the Holocaust. If we take out that keystone, if we could just be racist against the Jews, if we could just normalize anti-Semitism, just institutionalize that again, then look what it opens the door to. Oh, then, every time somebody, we can discriminate against this group, or those people are like that, we immediately point to the Holocaust. Well, that's where that kind of thinking leads, right? It leads to mass murder. If you take the Holocaust away, and today, students don't know about it, college students don't hear about it, nobody learns their history, our World War II vets are dying, all of this stuff is falling out of living history. If people can minimize the Holocaust, deny it, put it to one side, pull the keystone out of the archway, it opens the door for everything else. That's it. Bring back racism, bring back segregation, bring back, we have to have laws to prevent machination and mixing of races, and oh God. We'll go back into, a petty, primitive, ignorant time that we evolved away from. Let's not go backwards. Okay, it was less than 150 years ago that Jews in Frankfurt had to live in a separate part of the town, the ghetto, couldn't leave on Sundays, couldn't work in certain professions. Only a certain number of marriages were allowed each year. Only a certain number of Jews were allowed to move into town, right? All these kinds of restrictions on Jewish activity. And that was in a time when people, bankers like the Rothschilds and the Baron Cohens and others were very powerful and wealthy, right? Even with wealthy and powerful bankers who were helping the world's financial system and propping up all of these governments in Europe and keeping the economy going and all this kind of thing. Even with that, Jews had those kinds of restrictions. We don't need that again, okay? I am as human as anyone else. My children are human beings like anyone else, and we deserve rights. We already have to deal with people minimizing Jewish life as it is, right? And October 7th, they just kind of brush it aside, right? Jews are forced to prove when we have atrocities against us, but, anytime anyone claims we've committed any kind of atrocity, that we've done anything wrong, it's immediately believed, even when it's never true, right? Journalists had to go see the corpses of babies that had been beheaded to prove that that claim was true. But when a rocket fell in the parking lot of a hospital and Hamas ran out there, Israel bombed a hospital, everyone reported it. Everyone believed it right away. The Jews did it, obviously. Sniveling, conniving trolls with horns on their heads, blood matzah and secret space lasers. So that we don't want to go back that direction, okay? We don't want to go back that direction. So that's why there are limits to freedom of speech, and that is good taste, right? It would not be in good taste to bring someone on who, on your show to talk about how the history's most notorious villain is actually not the villain, and history's greatest hero in the 20th century anyway, Winston Churchill, is not heroic. He's the bad guy. We don't need to hear that kind of nonsense. We already have enough of this neo-Nazi, anti-Semitic nonsense among the green-haired college students, right? If people on the right start going into this, it's going to normalize anti-Semitism once again. So, one more time, I ask, why is anybody listening to this to Tucker Carlson and his nonsense when he's just out engaging in demagoguery and he's just saying things to try to get likes and get attention, being contrarian very deliberately, and spreading foreign propaganda and racism and all kinds of nonsense. It needs to stop. Right? There's no reason this guy should be famous. Stop listening to him. You've got the Inside Israel News show here. You have good facts and good reason here. You don't need any of that nonsense. Now he's messing with the son of a mensch. So with that, we'll move on to Eamon's Minute.
Hello everybody, welcome to Eamon's Minute, where I tell you a cool fact from history. Today we're going to talk about the Comte de Lafayette, who came to America in 1777 in order to help the American revolutionaries. At the Battle of Brandywine in the same year, on September 11th, he ended up getting injured in the battle and falling off his horse. We don't know if he fell off his horse first or if he got shot and then fell off his horse. But we know he fell off his horse and had to spend 6 months in a hospital recovering. After the 6 months, he ended up protecting Washington and being by his side as Cornwallis surrendered at the Battle of Yorktown in 1781.
That's Eamon's Minute. Now back to you, Dad.
Visit the Inside Israel News store on Etsy to get your swag and support the show at the same time. You can get the Promised Land shirt or the Now You're Messing with the Son of a Mensch shirt or other interesting swag, phone cases, and such at the store. Go to Etsy, look up Inside Israel News, or you can go to the website, insideisrael.news, and click on the image of the store, of the items for sale. Get your swag and show your support for Israel today. All right, when it comes to American politics, keep things relatively short and simple here. We have just had the vice presidential debate, and looking at how things are, the polls are actually looking pretty good for Trump. It's close, but he looks to be leading in the battleground states. In my opinion, the best scenarios are 312 in the Electoral College. You need 270 to win, but it's looking like Trump could pull out with 312 or more. Could be closer than that. It's not entirely clear exactly how that's going to go, but polls are looking good and generally favoring him. Of course, there are lots of left-wing polls out there trying to say the opposite. These days it's pick a poll, whatever poll you like. I think that people on the right are much more eager to be honest about the polling. Trafalgar, Rasmussen, Atlas. They're trying to get more honest results. They're trying to be scientific, whereas Quinnipiac still comes out with polls that have Trump ahead, but from time to time. But they're trying to support a left-wing narrative, and that's what ends up happening. So you'll hear people talking about, trying to suggest that Harris is ahead in the polls. Well, then why do her internal polls look so bad. We have the Senate candidate Slotkin saying that she doesn't think Harris can win in Michigan. Well, there's that. So I may analyze Congress a little more in the future. Senate's looking especially good for the GOP right now. But anyway, I'll come back to that in the future. Right now, so that's kind of the general direction American politics is going. I have just a couple things I want to say about the debate, the vice presidential debate. Good showing for both of them. According to the CBS poll, it was like 42% thought Vance won, 41% thought Waltz won, and 17% thought it was a tie. So basically, if you're voting for Trump, you thought, Vance won. If you're voting against Trump, you thought Waltz won. And if you're, there are people a lot of people who thought it was pretty much a tie. I am fairly convinced that if Trump and Harris had a debate and it had no impact on the race, like it drove the race and it didn't drive the race in any direction, right? A lot of people thought Kamala had won the debate, but the issues went more in Trump's direction. People, the issues that people think are important or that think Trump is good at, economy and national security, Trump gained, immigration. Trump gained on those issues. And it didn't move the polls, right? So it didn't move the needle. This one won't move the needle either. No one was convinced by Waltz to vote against Trump, who wasn't already going to vote against Trump. No one was convinced by Vance to vote against Harris, who wasn't already convinced to vote for Harris. It is nice to see a little bit more of the cordiality and collegial attitude. We don't have to be so knock down, drag out, and that kind of thing in politics. And so it's nice to see some of that. Maybe, just maybe, there's hope that in the near term we can get back to a less personal, less hateful politics. But real quick before I move on from American politics, it is of hateful and sick politics that I must speak. So, they've erected this, maybe that's not the right word to say, this nude statue of Trump along the freeway in Las Vegas. So, somebody did. And a nude effigy of Trump out there that is anatomically correct. In other words, the male parts are there. And this is supposed to mock Trump somehow. Children are going to be in those cars that drive by. You know what I mean? Like, what is it with these sick people who are just so eager to get, especially male genitalia out in front of children? Anyway, this I don't understand. But this kind of behavior, it really just indicates a kind of sickness in the left's thinking about politics. And I'm not saying the right is all perfect. Right has its problems too here and there, but not nearly to this degree. I mean, the derangement there, where you would make a nude effigy. I mean, can you just imagine if someone in Texas erected a nude effigy of Kamala Harris? I mean, anatomically correct. The left would lose its mind. It would be the worst thing ever, but it's okay to do this to people on the right, to be humiliating and that kind of thing. The degree of narcissism there, right? That, we're so good, we can do whatever, and we can have a good laugh at Trump and this kind of thing. We can humiliate our opponents because they're so bad. But if anyone says any lightest thing about us, oh my God, it's the end of the world, you can't say that. It's the insanity. Wow. Just, wow. Speaking of sickness, so everyone said don't see the movie Civil War. I didn't watch it in theaters, but it's on HBO Max. I went and watched it. Don't watch it. I'm not recommending it. I watched it because, having heard about it, I had to comment on it, right? And what I saw was horrifying and disgusting to an extreme that... the sickness, it makes the sickness of the Trump effigy seem really tame, right? So it's a movie about spoiler alert, I'm going to talk about the plot. You're not going to want to see it. It's a horrible movie. It's those horror movies where there's always someone in them where you're rooting for them to die, right? You spend the whole movie basically rooting for the three characters that, like they're going off on some kind of suicidal thing to put themselves in danger. And you're like, how long is it going to take before these people are all killed? There's a young adult in it that, he's like, it'd be kind of sad if she got killed. But for the rest of them, it's like, these people are all losers and they're deliberately driving into danger. It's like, they're running at the killer, from that point of view. It's like, I can't connect with these. They're unrelatable characters. They're nuts. The movie starts off with a suicide bombing by somebody carrying the American flag. How sick is that? Who imagines something like that? We don't have suicide bombings in, the West. I mean, there's no 72 virgins for you to go and blow yourself up, right, in Christian or Jewish thought. So just wow. It was, again, very disturbing. And there's the famous scenes been going around where, there's somebody and there are two Chinese people with them and he shoots the Chinese people because they're not American. Like, what kind of American are you? And, this is like people who commit these kinds of crimes and they're burying people in a mass grave. People who go around and commit these kinds of crimes of mass murder and this kind of thing, they're on some kind of a power trip. They don't care if you're American or whatever. Like if you don't agree with them, their politics, their whatever, they're in charge of the situation. They have power. They're going to kill the people they don't like, right? Yes, Hitler killed the Jews, but he also killed communists. He killed members of the Centrum Party. He killed, people on the center right. The last days of his administration, he ordered Konrad Adenauer killed. Adenauer just narrowly escaped. He also ordered the SS to kill all their scientists, like Werner von Braun, and that kind of thing. The guy went nuts. He was killing everybody. And if you're in a situation where a civil war is coming to an end, right, and the president is losing as purported. Anyway, so it was dumb. It didn't make any sense. It's not really not how things work. People in American military uniform aren't going to be going around shooting civilians and this kind of thing. Who imagines this? I don't know. This is the work of a sick mind. Speaking of which, the war crimes. Right. So granted, in civil wars, oftentimes people do not behave according to the laws of war. But in the American Civil War, soldiers did not go around shooting captured, prisoners of war and this kind of thing. It's difficult to imagine if we had a conflict in this country again like that it would be that way. But, they come across a wounded soldier and shoot him. Like that's a war crime. You don't shoot wounded soldiers, enemy combatants. You can shoot when they're shooting at you, right? You shoot to kill, but you don't shoot wounded, disabled, harmless people, right? Then they capture 3 soldiers and they have rock and roll music playing while the guy's machine gunning them to death. That was really sick and disgusting. I don't know who celebrates this kind of thing, but just demented. I don't know. It's really sick. So then they get to the White House. They're storming the White House, and the limo leaves, crashes, and they're, 2 people get out, and it's a woman, an unarmed woman, not in uniform, wearing a civilian, who is played by a brown-skinned actress. So, she looks Latina or something like that. And she gets out of the limo and she says, "Don't shoot." And they immediately shoot her and a Secret Service agent who also has his hands up. These are civilians. These are not military personnel. They are not armed and they're being shot. Like, what kind of sick, twisted people are these are fighting on that side of the Civil War? I mean, just again, and then they go into the White House. They have Secret Service agents shooting at them. They shoot back. Okay, I'm willing to go with that to the extent that, right, people are shooting at you. They get to the press secretary's office, and presumably the press secretaries are trying to negotiate for the president in this movie to be evacuated or whatever. Again, played by a black actress. I think they're trying to do Candace Owens or something. I don't know what their effigy is there, but it's a black woman. She has her hands up. She's in a civilian outfit. She's trying to negotiate. Someone could grab her by the arm and shove her aside, and she would be irrelevant, and they wouldn't have to think about her again. And they shoot her. And then they go and they shoot the president. Well, who's purportedly Donald Trump, of course. So they made this whole movie so somebody could play out their shoot Trump fantasy, which is sick in and of itself. But then they want to go and fantasize about shooting wounded soldiers, burying people in mass graves, shooting innocent people who are putting their hands up and saying, don't shoot. So I'm just sitting here like, so whoever made this movie wants to behave like the Russian army or Hamas. Like these are sick, twisted people. And I keep trying to tell you guys that there is this sickness out there. Not everyone on the left is like this, but the people who are, the deranged and demented, this needs to stop. They need to cut this out. And so it's a perfect example. So if anything, don't see the movie. It sucks. It's terrible. But it is another example of this kind of demented nonsense, naked statues and murder fantasies of going around shooting people and just horrifying. If this Western Front, as they're calling it, is behaving like that in my America, yeah, I'm going to try to shoot all of them dead too. When they're shooting at me, capture those who can be captured, because those people are pretty evil. The good guys in this movie were more evil than the bad guys are being portrayed as. It's just, just sickening. What's the point in winning a war if you have no moral authority? Anyway, this is me. Okay, so this is that. That's what I'm going to leave off for now. I'll discuss more American politics another time. There's plenty of time for that. Time to dive into international affairs. World War III by proxy continues apace. Mostly I want to say just quick updates on things. China continues to agitate in the South China Sea and against Taiwan. Russia continues its attempt to invade Ukraine, committing horrific atrocities there. Blowing up a children's hospital isn't enough. They got to keep the war going. And, throwing these meat grinder human wave assaults at Ukrainian forces, which lead to thousands of Russian casualties. But, Putin is willing to kill as many of his people as he has to rebuild the Soviet empire, right? More on that in a second. The Ukrainians are basically holding the Russians now. There have been small little things moving back and forth here and there, and different attempts by the Russians to advance in different areas. But for the most part, the Ukrainians are holding the line. And they continue to advance in Kursk. And they have significant Russian forces trapped beyond the same river, which is holding them back. And so he's like, the Ukrainians continue to be doing well. Somebody challenged me, I said, the Ukrainians are winning. And they're like, well, you can't prove they're winning. They're losing the war. And it's like, no, they're winning. They're not losing. How you win a war is you don't lose, right? So I've talked about before, and I'm not the only one who's said this. But many historians have made the point, Neil Ferguson not least of them, that Winston Churchill won the Second World War when he refused to surrender to Hitler, when he refused to negotiate, right? That movie, the Darkest Hour, right? Gary Oldman, great film, obviously a dramatized version of it, not entirely accurate, but basically that whole incident where, they conducted the Dunkirk withdrawal and stood up to, Churchill stood up to Hitler and wouldn't just surrender and let him keep control of Europe. That's when Britain won the war. Now, they fought for, the next 2 years alone at first, and then eventually with the Soviet Union, and then eventually the U.S. joined the war. But ultimately, Britain won. There were lots of twists and turns, and there were dark days, and there were times when it looked like Britain couldn't hold out much longer, and, people counted them out. Like, oh, it's only a matter of time now before Britain throws in the towel, but they won. The same thing with Ukraine. Ukraine won this war when they didn't fall in 2 weeks, right? When they defeated the Russian incursion near Kursk, that was headed toward Kyiv, and the thrust that came from Belarus that came in through the Chernobyl exclusion zone, right? When the Russian forces were stopped and failed to take Kyiv, then Ukraine ended up winning the war because they didn't lose, right? That's how you win a war. Now the two are fighting. It's like a boxing match. They keep punching each other, right? But until somebody goes down and is counted out, it's a boxing match, right? We're still hitting until somebody goes down. And that's where we are. We're the punch, punch, punch. And Israel is also in, we're pretty close there. The 200 ballistic missiles that Iran just fired into Israel were a huge mistake. And now Israel is in the position of being able to strike back directly at Iran. Israel has every opportunity now to wipe out Iran's nuclear facilities and neutralize Iran as a threat. They could, if Israel could decapitate Iran like they did with Hezbollah, then the Iranian people could rise up and restore democracy, restore freedom. I mean, Jimmy Carter just turned 100 years old. Now we have this joke, he was president when the Shah fell and had to flee the country and the Islamic Republic was established. Could he live long enough to see the Shah return? Obviously the son of the Shah who was deposed, but still, I'm not sure I necessarily favor the return of the monarchy, but at the very, at least, a constitutional monarchy would be a major positive change for Iran, given the circumstances. It's a low bar, right? Anything would be better than the current government. So, there's that opportunity there. If Iran could be knocked out, if we can give Zelensky what he needs for his victory plan, he met with President Trump. They talked. Trump didn't necessarily treat him well, with great respect, but Zelensky allowed himself to be used to a certain extent as a campaign tool for Harris. So there's a little bit of animosity there. It's understandable. Trump takes these things personally, and the truth is everyone does. Trump just shows it. He says the quiet part out loud. But the fact is, every politician knows when they've been snubbed, right? And, at the same time, Zelensky is trying to get permission to use their weapons, use American technology and American weapons on Russia. So, he's trying to schmooze sweet talk the administration into letting him do that. You had British Storm Shadow missiles. The British say the Ukrainians can fire them anywhere in Russia, but they have to use U.S. technology to target those missiles, right, to send them to their targets. We need U.S. permission to use that technology for that purpose. So, he's also trying to do that. In any case, according to both Zelensky and Trump, they had a good conversation, and it seems that Zelensky told Trump his victory plan, or at least the gist of it, if Ukraine could just win the war, right? They have invaded Russia. They're holding the Russian advance in the Donbas. If Putin would just withdraw from Ukraine, if Russia loses, this is done, right? Then that's over, right? So if Iran and Russia could be defeated in this war, North Korea really can't do anything on its own. They're broke, starving, and all that kind of thing. China becomes isolated, right? So it is in the best interests of the United States to see our enemies, the people who say they are our enemies, the people who act like they are our enemies, the people who are directly hostile to our interests, like Russia, Iran, North Korea, China, Venezuela, and other countries that support them, the Houthi rebels, so on and so forth, Hezbollah, all of our enemies. Thankfully we have Israel to deal with Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, who are also threatening the United States. In any case, it is in our best interest to defeat these people. If we could defeat them, China stands alone. And then it doesn't matter what Xi Jinping is able to accomplish, if he's able to build up his military and all of that, because he'll be alone, right? There'll be nothing for him to do. Okay, so real quick, because I did have this conversation, and somebody was asking about, what are U.S. interests? And, it occurs to me, I come on here and I talk and I try to help you guys understand too, and I think most of you do, the things that I talk about here. But there are things that are obvious to me that are not necessarily obvious to everyone else. And so when that comes up, when these things happen, just ask, shoot me a message on, on X, America Israel Insider News is the name of the account on X. Instagram, same thing. On Facebook and everywhere else, it's Inside Israel News. Look me up, send me a message, because like I was saying, talking about people trying to minimize the Holocaust and all that kind of thing. And somebody says, well, why? Why is that such a bad thing? Well, then I should explain, as I did earlier. Now I have elucidated. You can tell that, you can understand why that's a bad thing. Well, in this case, what are our strategic interests? So the way I always talk about strategic interests are in terms of the worst case scenario. What is the absolute worst thing that could happen in the world right now that would harm the United States the most? Okay. Obviously, a nuclear exchange with Russia or whatever, but we won't go into that kind of thing. Something that could credibly happen without ending the world. What would be the worst thing that could happen? The worst thing that could happen to us strategically right now would be China taking over East Asia and Southeast Asia, being the dominant power there with no U.S. influence in Asia. Because a lot of our economic interests are in Asia right now, especially Southeast Asia, which is doing a lot of the transitional manufacturing. Like Southeast Asia is doing the cheap manufacturing that China can no longer do, that buys us time to get our manufacturing base and our industry back online here in the U.S. Kind of came up in the debates, like, why did we send it overseas in the first place? That the wisdom of that decision I cannot attest to. In other words, it was stupid. We all knew it was stupid at the time, but, working class people were stupid, right? What do we know? It's the experts, the economists, they say, oh, it's good for everybody, offshore, and that money comes back to us and this kind of thing. And, I remember at the time a bunch of arguments about that, but I'd point out that, there's a limit to that. That can only go so far. There are benefits up to a point, and then there's a point where it is not beneficial. So, the point where a lot of Americans are losing our jobs, that's not beneficial to the American people. Okay. So that would be the number one nightmare scenario. Okay. Number two nightmare scenario. The Soviet Empire is reestablished. So Belarus, Ukraine, the Baltic states, Kazakhstan, all of them, Putin brings back his thing and dominates Europe. Europe are important trading partners to us. Yes, they're having demographic problems. Yes, they're having economic problems. They are still important trading partners. First of all, that would completely erase the sacrifices. Either scenario would completely erase the sacrifices of the Second World War. If those two scenarios came to pass, if China dominated East Asia and Russia dominated Europe, every single American who died in the Second World War will have died for nothing, because we will be, it'll be as if they didn't make those sacrifices. And that is a big problem. Obviously, the big nightmare scenario would be both of them happening at once, but we're talking about kind of, threats in isolation, right? So China taking over, that's bad. Russia taking over, that's bad, right? Iran, right? Number 4, Iran, North Korea, small state actors dominating allies, right? So if North Korea were able to invade South Korea or somehow dominate South Korea effectively or something like that, that would be bad for U.S. interests. Iran dominating the Middle East, that would be bad for U.S. interests. Venezuela dominating South America, that would be bad for U.S. interests. Okay, those are the kinds of things. And then the fourth strategic threat has to do with non-state actors, proxies, terrorist groups, 9/11 kind of stuff. Just, who's out there, who could attack us and cause harm to us, who is not, does not have an easy return address. And now that the Taliban have Afghanistan back under their control, there are plenty of groups like that looking to find a way to infiltrate the U.S. and cause harm. Okay, and then the fifth is a crisis of our own making, and that is that our national debt is now $35 trillion. It's larger than our GDP. And if we don't get a handle on it, we're going to be on the path to bankruptcy, especially since Gen Z is a smaller generation, and so tax revenue is going to be tight for the foreseeable future, even if we have a booming economy, which means we're really going to have to tighten the belt and be fiscally responsible. Anyway, so the point is, those are the 5 major strategic threats to the United States today, and Russia taking over Ukraine is a big part of one of them, okay? If we could defeat Russia without firing a shot, that's worth something. it's worth a hell of a lot more money than we've given to Ukraine. And when I say given to Ukraine, that we have spent on our national industrial base, rebuilding our military industrial complex, which we let go after the Cold War, so that we have the capacity to make the weapons and supply them to Ukraine in numbers that are useful on the battlefield. Okay? The number one threat tactically to us, or it's also a strategic issue, but the threat to us is that if China were to attack, they could consume our munitions and absorb our munitions faster than we could produce them. At a certain point, we run out of air defense missiles. At a certain point, we run out of anti-ship missiles. At a certain point, we cease to be able to fight because we don't have the munitions we need. And that gives them free rein. I mean, if you're familiar with the history of the Second World War, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and then basically had free rein over the Pacific. They, until May of 1942, the Pacific was theirs, and the U.S. could barely, scratch at them, And then finally, we had a couple of close fought battles, and the Guadalcanal campaign, and then our manufacturing base kicked into gear from the Two-Ocean Navy Act and from the war economy and all that, and we finally had the planes, the pilots, the munitions, the ships, and everything else we needed, and we had enough to overwhelm the Japanese, to overwhelm the Germans, to supply the British, and to supply the Soviet Union, and to finance all of this, because America is that powerful. Well, that doesn't exist today. It would take us 50 years to rebuild our aircraft carrier fleet if we had to rebuild it today, right? If we had a Pearl Harbor type event, right? In Pearl Harbor, we had 9 battleships there, a bunch of them were sunk, all of them were damaged. Okay, if we had an event like that, let's just say 3 aircraft carriers were destroyed. It would take us 2 decades to replace those aircraft carriers, right? And you just imagine, this is a war. And then if there were any more losses after that, we just don't have the capacity now, even if we wanted to, even if we rushed, even if we hurried, right? And given who our enemies are now, we can't count on German or Japanese shipyards being available. They're closer to our enemies than we are, and thus more vulnerable to attack. Things are fragile. A few bombs could put a shipyard out of commission for quite some time. Okay, so Xi Jinping is looking at this and if we're defending Ukraine, then we defend Taiwan. That's bad. Right? So that deters him. And seeing us rebuild our military industrial complex such that we could have the kind of logistics supply trains, and, the ability to make enough air defense missiles and air-to-air missiles, anti-ship missiles, and munitions and planes and trained pilots so that we could defeat him, right? So it's all good for us. It's all good for our strategic interests. So all these people trying to say, no money over here, no more money. And, they're saying, with the North Carolina thing, not another dollar to another country. So, we're going to let the Russians take over Europe while we're busy dealing with a hurricane. We're going to let the Iranians perpetrate another Holocaust in the Middle East because of a hurricane. We're going to let China take over Taiwan. I mean, I just think logically, think rationally, people. I understand. These are complicated things. They're difficult to understand. Historically speaking, appeasement doesn't work. Okay? You can't let these bad guys have anything. All right, whatever these people want, we don't want them to have. If Putin wants to take over Georgia, we don't want him to take over Georgia, right? That's against our best interests. If Putin wants to take over Latvia, we don't want him to take over Latvia. That's against our interests. If Xi Jinping wants to take over Vietnam, we don't want him to take over Vietnam. That's against our interests, okay? If Iran wants to defeat Israel, we don't want them to defeat Israel. We don't want them to control Iraq. We don't want them to control Syria, so on and so forth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You want your enemies to be on the back foot and losing, and you want your allies to be on the front foot and winning. And the biggest problem we have now is a problem America's had many times. We have humiliated and insulted our allies, and we are friendlier toward our enemies. I mean, the weakness that has been shown to Russia, the weakness that's been shown toward China and Iran have emboldened them. That's worse than appeasement. It's again, back to this question. How did Hitler come to power? Because they let him, right? The powers that be, the people who could have stopped him didn't. And then once he was in power in Germany, the allied countries, the Western countries who could have stopped him didn't. They remilitarized the Rhineland. What do they do? Nothing, right? He took over Austria. What do they do? Nothing. And Mussolini's sitting there like, I don't want him to control Austria, but, well, he's winning, so I guess I'm going to side with him, right? He tried to take the Sudetenland. They let him have that. He took over Czechoslovakia. Took Czechia literally and turned Slovakia into a rump puppet state, right? And then he invaded Poland. Finally, somebody's like, "Oh yeah, no, that's too far. We're at war now." And he's like, "Okay, well, we'll take Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, Norway, and France. How about France?" So you can't let these people get away with things. All right. So with that, these things seem very obvious to me, and it seems. I've heard people describing, people who are pro-Ukraine as hawkish. No, I'm a dove, all right? I want peace. What I want most of all is not to have any of my children buried at Arlington National Cemetery because they fought and died in a war, okay? You prevent wars by showing strength. You prevent wars by winning them before they're won, right? I mean, if the Allies had not given Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland, Czechoslovakia, to Germany, then Hitler couldn't have taken over Czechoslovakia. If he had invaded the Sudetenland, which is easily defensible, the Allies, and even probably the Soviet Union would have pitched in, could have helped Czechoslovakia by arming them, and they could have fought the Germans and defeated Hitler right then and there. That was the backstop. That was the last thing that could have stopped him. So, it's just, when you let these things go too far, the bully comes and takes your lunch money. If you don't fight back, he's going to take your lunch money again and take greater and greater liberties until you do something. You have to draw a line and have a boundary. All right, real quick, before we go beyond, too far out there, Japan has a new prime minister. Now, I've talked about how crazy French politics is. Oh, to say Japanese politics is meshuggah, is insane, is nuts, is like the understatement of the century. Just wow. Japanese politics is unique. Let's put it that way. It is certainly very different. The Japanese political system has been dominated by the Liberal Democratic Party basically since the end of the occupation. Two parties came together, the Democratic Party and the Liberal Party, Liberal Democratic Party, and formed a powerful party that has ruled Japan ever since. There was a brief time in the 90s, late 90s, where a coalition of other parties governed the country very briefly, but significant names, who we're going to talk about here in a second, who were part of that were former LDP members, right? So, now the LDP is the center-right party. Most that coalition that came together were socialists, former LDP members, the Japanese left at all, basically. And again, that was just a brief, it was the exception that proved the rule, right? So the LDP has been the governing party, and they have a bunch of different factions, and all those factions, if you've ever watched an anime, a high school anime, where they make a really big deal out of this club and that social group and this kind of thing, that's a fictionalized and hyperbolic version of the way the Japanese behave politically. You have these different factions, and it's like, who's with this social group, who's with that social group, who's with this faction, and these can, they're overlapping. I mean, to call it an onion would be, if you took an onion and diced it, and it was still held together in the shape of an onion, it's all interwoven and interlocking, and anyway, it's convoluted and complicated. But I think that's the way they like it. So they've had several prime ministers since Abe Shinzo left office. I'm gonna stick with the Japanese tradition of doing the family name first and then the personal name, because otherwise I get confused and lost, and I'll either end up reversing them or doing them backwards or whatever, and I'll get caught up in that because I prefer the Japanese tradition of doing it that way. I think it's a better way of doing it. But anyway, So, after Abe left office, you had Prime Minister Suga, and then Kishida. Kishida has been embroiled in a number of scandals and problems that have been happening. Not he personally, his government has had a lot of problems. So he announced that he'd be stepping down. And 8 candidates from all across the LDP spectrum ran for office. And what I think is interesting is that the usual suspects, the person that you thought would work out, did not. So, Abe's protege did not win, right? Takeichi Sanae, she, first of all, is a woman. She's very conservative, and she was Abe's protege, right? And so she was somebody that everyone looked to go. And when I say conservative, I mean like no change conservative, not conservative as in like politically conservative. Against social change, against political change, generally in favor of maintaining the status quo. With all of Japan's demographic problems and that kind of thing, they have some serious issues. There are concerns right now about family names and people wanting to let women keep their family names, which is basically the Korean system. If you're Korean and you're a Park and you marry, you stay a Park, right? You don't take on the family name of your the husband. The children are all born with the husband's name. So if a Kim marries a Park, then the children are Kim, right? The male, if the man's Kim, right? Then the children are Kims, right? In Japan. I'm sorry. I love those videos. People making jokes, in Japan, we don't say, we say, this kind of thing. They're very fun. They're very amusing. The Japanese do have a good sense of humor about themselves, at least. Jews, we share this, we're always laughing at ourselves too. So anyway, they have this thing where there's a push to allow women to keep their family names when they marry. There is a push to allow female emperors. I don't know what the controversy is about this. Japan has had female emperors in the past. I mean, if you look up Empress Suiko, now granted, that was back in the late Heian, and before the Kamakura period, it was centuries ago. But they have had female leaders before, female empresses. It has happened, right? So, now with the royal family being very small, they're having difficulties because the prince who was, in line of succession has married a commoner, and therefore he cannot, he can't take the throne. So there's all kinds of stuff going on. People have, they get a new emperor, and they have a daughter, and so there's Princess Eiko. I think Aiko is her name, and if I'm wrong, I'll look that up and correct it later. But they have a daughter, and this daughter is now the successor to the throne in theory, except that at the current laws, it can only be a man. Also, they give you a question about gay marriage. I don't know, because it's like, obviously, if gay people want to live together and call themselves married, I really don't have a problem. You do you. Whatever people want to do, in my face or bother me. That's the point. But there is a push for normalizing gay marriage. I think there's a counter argument to be made that in a time of demographic decline, where you really need every child you can get, you don't want to encourage those types of relationships. I'm not speaking for myself. I'm speaking for the Japanese, their cultural perspective, right? So there are a lot of people there that are against it because, for traditionalist reasons, but also because of the demographic situation. That's where people get confused in Russia. Russia is having a demographic collapse, and so their opposition to homosexuality, while it is bigoted, is aimed at they want more children. But, the people aren't interested in the opposite sex. They're not going to be making children. So that debate in Japan is kind of I don't see why not. What's the problem here? Just, it's not an issue. Focus on the families, right? Whatever happens, keep focusing on the families and having more children. That's where their emphasis needs to be. So the conservative candidate, Abe's protege, Takaichi, she is against all of that. No female emperors. Women take their husband's name, except there's a rule that if the female is the last line in her family, then sometimes that requires the male to take the female's family name. That's been done in Japanese culture for some time. I encountered it first in an old anime, 30-year-old anime I watch. I don't watch many of them, but there are a few that I really liked. And it was just kind of interesting because this character changed from a male name to from his family. He changed his family name. And it's like, well, how does that happen? Oh, well, under these rare circumstances. Anyway, so that one, I think it's a non-issue, but she's against it. She's against gay marriage. She's against female emperors. She's against women keeping their names. She's against everything. She's against it, right? And she lost, right? Because their new prime minister is going to be Ishiba. Ishiba Shigeru is one of those LDP leaders who's been outspoken. He's been kind of an outsider. He did not attend Tokyo University. That's like, that was the thing that blew my mind when I heard he was a serious candidate. Like all of the politicians, all of the big leaders went to Tokyo U. When someone gets into the cabinet who did not attend Tokyo University, it's huge. People are like, whoa, how did that happen? Wow, It's your rags to riches story in Japan is someone who got into Tokyo U. And if they didn't, then they're the exception that proves the rule, right? That it's Mr. Smith goes to Washington, right? So Ishiba was one of those rebels who left the LDP and joined that coalition of parties that were for reform back in the 90s and changed how things are done in Japan. That was their demographic collapse was already in full swing. 20 years on, it's getting even worse. But they're trying to work to correct it. Anyway, so Ishiba is an interesting character. So he's associated with certain nationalist factions. So, and I've said before, it's one thing to be proud of your country. Some nationalism can go a bit far, and considering the history of Japanese nationalism in the last century, it's not always a good thing. We don't need people delving back into Yamato Damashi, the manifest destiny of Japan to control Asia. At the same time, he favors reforming the Japanese constitution to remove the pacifist provision. And Ishiba has been defense minister. He's been in the defense establishment. So in terms of defending Japan and the military situation, very good leader for Japan. And I think that probably weighed in his favor to win the leadership race. He's nationalistic, but he does not go to the Yasukuni shrine. And this is one thing that really distinguished him from Takeichi. It's one thing to regret, the things that happened and to honor those who died to defend Japan, or who at least thought they were defending Japan, maybe fighting wars of aggression. It's not really defense. But the Yasukuni Shrine includes war criminals. It celebrates all of the war dead, including the war criminals, including those who died at Nanjing, those who committed these terrible atrocities. And that's controversial, right? So if Takeichi is going there and, paying tribute to them, Ishiba is not. And that is a good sign. He's considered relatively pro-China. What's funny about that is pro-China in Japanese politics means not 100% anti-China. And that's an interesting thing. Basically, he's saying as the U.S. is pulling back in the world, as U.S. power wanes in the region, that it's basically time to start an Asian NATO, right? That Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, etc., Singapore, Indonesia, all of these countries, the Philippines, they need to get together and form a NATO of their own for collective defense. Now, basically, if they formed a NATO and if the United States backed it, that would basically deter China thereon. Right, because you'd have all these countries promising that an attack on one is an attack on all, and therefore an invasion of Taiwan would immediately mean war. Okay, so you get the point. So he's an interesting character. He favors the gay marriage, favors women keeping their last names, favors a female emperor, an empress, right? Interesting guy, kind of reform-minded. I'm going to keep an open mind on him. I think Ishiba has some potential to rock the boat a little bit, change things up, shake things up a little. The LDP has been quite stale for some time. When Koizumi Junichiro was prime minister, they did make some changes and did try to, make some economic improvement. Same with Abe Shinzo. There's been some attempt to move back in that direction. Obviously, Abe was assassinated, but there's that. Now, also, speaking of a Koizumi, right? Koizumi Shinjiro, the son of Koizumi, was also running in the leadership race. He's a young guy, kind of reform-minded. And while he lost, Ishiba has included him in the election team. So first thing Ishiba does as prime minister, he calls an election. So he's going to call an election. He's going to work his way through things. We'll see how things go. It's just I don't get to speak to Japanese politics very often. As the election goes through, I'll explain the electoral system. It's kind of interesting. It's a unique one. They have geographic elective districts, but they're not single member, right? You elect 5 representatives in a block, basically at large. It's kind of interesting to talk about. The U.S. experimented with electing representatives at large, at one time, of taking the top 2 and this kind of thing. It's been done, right? But very early on, we settled on the single-member geographic district. So now when we say, representative at large, we mean like Alaska or Delaware, a state that has just one representative. So at large now just is the term for the state that has the one representative representing the whole state. In those states, senators are a dime a dozen because there are 2 senators in every state. But, in Wyoming, there's only 1 representative. That's the joke there. Okay, so that'll be fun to talk about, and we'll see how the election goes. So that'll be a fun thing to follow up on. All right, so it's been another great episode, and it's always good here to bring the news, trying to get back on the game about posting more frequently and staying, keeping you guys on top of everything, trying to put myself back in, trying to get back on my game. So I'm working on it. Putting out some more walking videos if you want to see those. They're on X, they're on the Facebook page, they're posted on Truth Social under my name, under my personal name, Mensch-Kight, on Truth Social. And you can find those, and I try to make them funny or interesting or something, but they, between episodes, it gives me a chance to catch up with you guys and talk about important things that are happening as they happen. Anyway, so with that, I will say, as always, goodbye, Lehitrot.
Writers of the history, stand with me. Look into my eyes and see. People go away but never say goodbye. Someone stole the moon tonight, took my light. Everything is black and white. Who's the fool who told you boys don't cry? Hours and hours and flowers. Life is no game for the cowards. Why? The time goes by. Every day I'm losing my mind, holding on in this mysterious ride, dancing in the storm. We got nothing to hide. Take me home and leave the world behind. Baby, promise me that never again. I'm still wet from this October rain. October rain. Living in a fantasy, ecstasy. Everything is meant to be. We shall pass, but love will never die. Hours hours and hours and flowers. Life is no game for the cowards. Why the time goes away. Every day I'm losing my mind, holding on in this mysterious ride, dancing in the storm. We got nothing to hide. Take me home and leave the world behind. Baby, promise me that never again. I'm still wet from this October rain. October rain. October rain. Baby, promise me that never again. I'm still wet from this October rain. October rain. אין שום, אין מקום, אין אותי מיום ליום, כולם ילדים טובים אחד אחד. Bring them back home.